Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another breakdown. I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran, and today we are going to be taking a look at the Russia's disinformation campaign around the Moscova. And we're going to look at how we know that this is, in fact, a disinformation campaign. Let's get into it. But first, actually, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. I have a dream of hitting 100K and getting that cool silver plaque. And actually, it would mean a lot, right, to be able to put that up in my bedroom. Prove to my wife that this is, in fact, a real thing I've been doing, right? Okay. Let's get into it. First off, we are going to take a look at The Guardian. They have these nice quick hit summaries of different issues. And this is video of the Moscova, right? And definitely, we're going to keep it on mute because I think they use some strong language. But you can see there is a tugboat. What I find strange is that it looks like actually a civilian tugboat, right? This doesn't look like a military recovery vehicle, which is strange for a couple of reasons. First off, because Russia, this ship is part of a fleet, the Black Sea Fleet. Presumably, that fleet should have the ability to recover and tow other ships, but this may actually be perhaps a firefighting vehicle, something meant to help put out fires. It's tough to know. I'm not that familiar with naval emergency procedures like this. But one thing that is interesting, right, is that you would expect to see your fleet's flagship getting heavily damaged. You would want to see other ships nearby trying to do recovery operations. You would expect other ships nearby trying to recover the crew, and it's possible that's already happened. Yeah, this shows that it looks like the damage was somewhat towards the fore of the ship on the port side, right? It's listing very badly, clearly taking on water. What looked like some automated firefighting hoses are putting out water, and just generally it's possible that the ship has already had all the sensitive intelligence removed from it, all the crew are evacuated. It's possible that that's why it's still sitting here, but still you'd think they would just want to be able to recover their flagship of the fleet. Guys, I wanted to thank today's sponsor, adamandeve.com. Use code COMBAT to get 50% off one item and free shipping anywhere in the US and Canada. They offer 24/7 customer service, 90-day no-hassle returns, discreet packaging, and 20% of their profits go to combating HIV around the globe. Link is in the description, and thanks again to adamandeve.com for sponsoring today's video. Yep, it says the lifeboats have been deployed, no sailors visible on deck. Yeah, I'll also say that as a man yells, "What are you doing?" Yeah. So what's interesting to me too about this is that if there's a warship burning, this is just advice for life. If you see a piece of military equipment on fire, get as far away from it as humanly possible, because this is a cruise missile destroyer. So you hope that they were able to get out all of the cruise missiles or otherwise render them safe, because if that fire ignites a cruise missile, that ship is going to go from smoldering hulk to tiny little pieces very quickly. And you definitely don't want to be one of these ships who are extremely close to this extremely well-armed cruise missile destroyer. Again, it's possible, but I'm going to say unlikely, that the Russians managed to get all the munitions out, because the ship is on fire. There are places in the ship that they cannot go to. Maybe they are able to contain the fire and keep them away from cruise missiles, right? And other munitions that can be ignited. But that's a tall order. That ship's taken a lot of damage, and I would really worry about the safety of nearby ships. And that's maybe why we don't see Russian vessels anywhere nearby here, right? Because they want to be at an extremely safe standoff distance. And maybe these civilian ships are just being, well, stupid. There we go. He gets yelled at. Yep, not independently verified, but it does look a lot like the Moscova. Yeah, it's got these cruise missile launchers in the C-4, right? In the aft, it's got the helicopter landing pad. Yeah, I would really worry, given the amount of damage this has taken, I would worry tremendously about the integrity of those cruise missiles and presumably other munitions, right? You can see, yep, that hit. Those cruise missiles may have been compromised. It's tough to know how well constructed or well maintained they are in the get-go, and if they're able to be accessed, right? If the fire is too hot and a crew can't get in them, then the cruise missiles will just have to sit in the tubes, right? So let's talk a little bit about what exactly the Russian disinformation campaign is engaging in, and how do we know it's disinformation, right? So first off, it talks about sort of a translated statement from the Russian Ministry of Defense, who says, let's take a look, very little information about how the ship sank. Right there is sort of suspicious, right? The damage to the boat was sustained in an accident on board in stormy seas. And specifically what they said is a fire on board. And I think this is really important because you have to understand how to read political doublespeak. If you can't understand that, then you're going to be easily misled by politicians. And unfortunately, they all do it, right? Russia is pretty notorious about it, but they all do it. So if your warship gets hit by a cruise missile, it's possible that the kinetic energy of the actual explosion, right, if it's a direct hit, will destroy your ship outright. But what more frequently happens is that those cruise missiles or other bombings start fires within the ship, and those fires are what damage the ship most significantly. So if you word things just right, you can say, for example, that a fire did damage the ship. The fire was started by a cruise missile strike, right? But you don't have to, you have to remove essential context in order to make propaganda work, right? It says the accident, so there was a fire on board in stormy seas, right? Of course, the conditions of the ocean at the time of the cruise missile strike are immaterial. It's actually possible that the Ukrainians deliberately waited for the weather to be especially poor, where perhaps they felt that the ship's onboard defenses would have a tough time detecting and engaging incoming cruise missiles. I also had read, and we'll take a look at this article, that Ukraine used drones to help obfuscate and conceal the approach of cruise missiles from the ship's radar and automated defenses. But the point is that this Russian Ministry of Defense statement can be technically true, that the ship was damaged, true, by a fire on board, also true, in stormy seas, also true, right? Now, again, it ignores, it is saying individually true facts that ignore the larger fundamental truth because you've removed it from essential context, right? This is how you should view anytime you read something that sounds salacious, crazy, hard to believe, or extremely partisan or one-sided. You should ask, is there more to this story? Do I have enough information, right? Again, we can look at the larger media ecosystem. We're going to look at several different news sources that report on this, and that's going to help us understand what really happened. And this is how you should approach any of this sort of disinformation, or when you think you might be reading disinformation. Yep, talking about an accident on stormy seas. This is old footage of the Moscova. Here is what is very interesting. The Russian government has not confirmed any information about the casualties. There is rumor that the captain was killed, that there are large numbers of the crew may have been killed. It's tough to say, right? There's been very little information. What's very interesting, right? And this is another example of the Moscova. This is a more clear. This is the actual Russian Ministry of Defense statement, right? Cruiser suffered significant damage after a fire broke out and set off its ammunition. Again, likely very true statements like we talked about. Easy for these fires to spread to munition stores and cause secondary explosions, right? Leaving out the fact that the fire was started by a cruise missile strike, right? Which itself dealt significant damage. This is again, classic. The ship's 500-person crew was completely evacuated, but reports of distress signals from the Moscova did suggest otherwise, and the Moscova means there's nothing left. Okay, so let's take a look at another piece of very interesting. So this is, we talk about triangulating, and I hate the Daily Mail with a passion. I think they engage in reporting that's so poorly done, it's almost disinformation itself, but it can be useful as like a starting point to ask yourself, okay, what is the rumor? Because Daily Mail will report that. And then you confirm it with more legitimate sources. So we can be pretty certain if a left-leaning source like The Guardian and a right-leaning source like the Daily Mail are reporting the same thing, as is CNN, NBC, Fox News, and other sources, we can be pretty certain that this is something proximate to the truth, right? So this is interesting. The Daily Mail, of course, reporting that Russia releases it says soundless and undated video claiming to show survivors of doomed warship, including captain who is said to have been killed. I want to point out, again, speaking of disinformation, who was said to have been killed. This is a really bizarre way of phrasing things using the passive voice. And the passive voice is when you intentionally obfuscate the speaker or doer of the actions. So, for example, an active voice version of this would require you to identify the source. So you would say, survivors of doomed warship, including captain, who CNN reported had been killed by the Ukrainian missile attack, or including the captain who Ukrainian's Ministry of Defense said had been killed, right? That's an example of active voice. It forces you to attribute the action. So passive voice is a classic move, again, for obscuring the truth. And like we said, Daily Mail, they love to report rumors. And if you know you're reading rumors, it's a perfectly fine source of not news, but, you know, rumor. And this is classic, right? They don't need to attribute it because it can be sourced by something known to be unreliable or a source that's just not really vetted, a Twitter, a Telegram channel or something, right? So, but let's more significant, let's take a look at this video itself, which they've posted in its entirety. So this is from the Russian Ministry of Defense, right? We've got the volume on. It is 1 minute and 17 seconds. And as you can see, this is the crew here. And let's just listen. There's almost no sound. There might be no sound at all. But what's interesting is this is an inspection, right? You can see the crew all standing at attention as Russian military brass inspects it. Man, that is one overweight general. Always sort of shocked. Russian or U.S. military generals generally have to pass, generals and admirals have to pass what we call height and weight standards, where even as you get older, they become a little more liberal, but you're expected to have a certain level of body fat percentage that you remain below. Yep. Here's one of the other ways we know this is disinformation, is that context that should be readily available isn't. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is, if the crew was evacuated entirely, why would it would be easier to release dated information, an interview with the captain, a statement, or just pictures from the crew being evacuated, maybe pictures of the crew on another warship drinking tea and covered in blankets or something, right? Even their families greeting them at the port. There's so many other opportunities to produce, to message that the crew actually survived, that when you have something that is bizarre and sort of needlessly contrived, that you should right away ask yourself, well, why aren't they using a better, more primary source? And I think it's pretty clear this is probably wordless, because if you were to include audio, it would indicate that this is, I imagine, an inspection of the crew prior to embarkation, right? Prior to leaving port and starting combat operations. This would be exactly what you'd expect from high-level Russian admirals, right? Doing a final check and inspection of the troops. And it makes sense, right? You can see this is looks like a relatively brisk day, right? And it's unlikely that while this attack may have occurred around this time, this may be prior to the... Oh, there you go. Here we go. The crew of at the main base, hero city of Sevastopol. It may be explaining that it's in Sevastopol, right, prior to embarkation. And then it says, right, will continue service in the Navy. Compulsory service are going to be released on a military register. So he could just be making a statement about the mission, right? This could absolutely apply to the ship before it left port, right? This, even if this is not spliced in, this could be a strategically taken statement, again, divorced from context, where it says, hey, the ship is at the main base, ready to depart on combat operations, and you're leaving for this combat operation. Officers, midship, and contract personnel are going to continue service and to comply with the law May to July. The contract personnel will be cycled off. And this could be a statement that absolutely applies to the ship before it ever left port, right? Again, by removing it from its original context and placing it into new context, we think we've actually discerned something. We think that he's talking about the survivors, but really he's talking about the ship months ago when it was preparing to leave port for combat operations. Anyway, guys, I hope, really sincerely, I hope talking about this has helped you guys understand how to read disinformation. And the reality is that it's easy to tell disinformation when it's a side that we already don't really believe. Russia, again, it has a long track record of engaging in disinformation and propaganda. But I think it's important to acknowledge that the side that you like may also be engaging in this, right? The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, while they are a side that you know, we in the West tend to favor a little bit, right? We've been supporting Ukraine for a long time. They have much stronger ties to the Europe and EU. But they also have a responsibility to message a pro-Ukrainian message. And so ask yourself, does some of their statements also align with this? Look at your own politicians. Once you learn to do this, once you learn to read through the parts of a statement that aren't included, you will see just how often politicians say nothing that sounds like something. Anyway, guys, thanks so much for joining me. If you want to access some exclusive content, including the chance to ask me questions in these Q&A videos, you want to come join me on Patreon. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier patrons, Cole Foster, Command Unit Caffeinated, Jakob Flavis, Dr. Chakra, Porter World, Time Brandon, Armored, Torun, and Z1 Joker. Link is in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next one.